Nothing makes our news director, Russell Stroud, more annoyed than when I wait for the music to play and then I come in and start talking. It makes him so mad. So, I mean, for that reason, I mean, I don't always do it, but I've intentionally been doing it just to mess with him because that's how we work over here. But regardless, right? This is Clutch with Keon Rose. This is a sports show, and we've got a pretty loaded schedule here today. Got a few things to talk about. Some interesting things came up, and then there was still some stuff like lingering from the weekend we never even really got to touch on. And then, of course, I've got a fantasy football league that's starting. I know week one of the season's already gone, but our draft was somehow set for tonight. So Jay Asks. That's the segment here. Jay Asks, the very popular segment. My girlfriend, Jay, she comes on the show. She is also my co-host in the Clutch Community Corner every Thursday at 6:30 around there. So tune into that as well. But she comes in, she asks questions as a girlfriend on behalf of significant others who don't know anything about sports. I think it's a public service that we provide for you here at Hot 1240, Hot News Talk Radio. And it's to me it's a very important one, and it's one that I very much enjoy doing. So I'm looking forward to that because now we have a fantasy football edition of Jay Asks. But before we move into all of that, and all of that includes Jay Asks, the Simone Biles story that's suddenly a big deal that really shouldn't be a big deal. More Kaepernick things because the story will never ever die. Apparently, our Kaepernick story is more prevalent than Deflategate. It has lasted longer and has had more staying power than Deflategate, and I never thought that we would see another story with more staying power than Deflategate. But here we are with all of that, and of course, over the weekend, the ESPN app died, and people were left bereft of scores and updates. So before we jump into any and all of that, I recommend that you check us out on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. That's Hot News Talk Radio on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. Simply search it, Hot 1240, Hot News Talk Radio in the search bar, and you will have it wherever you go. You can also check us out on our website, hotnewstalkradio.com or Noogaradio.com, and of course in the TuneIn Radio app. Search Hot News Talk Radio in the free app for whatever device you choose to use. That's the Hot News Talk Radio, or search Hot News Talk Radio, give us a favorite and press play, and you'll have Hot News Talk Radio. That's the TuneIn Radio app. Listen like you mean it. So we have an extension of the Colin Kaepernick story, which is that linebacker Brandon Marshall is losing endorsements over choosing to take a knee before the Broncos-Panthers game. And he chose to lose endorsements over it, that people took money from him over doing that. And he knew that the money was going to be lost, and he did it anyway. He strongly believed in doing this. And I understand if you feel there's some level of outrage towards this and people protesting during the national anthem, but you understand, and I think Charles Woodson, who is new to the NFL Countdown on ESPN, I think Charles Woodson said it probably better than anybody, that when you consider that Francis Scott Key, the man who wrote "And the Free and the Home of the Brave," the man himself owned slaves, you think about that and you realize, like, you still have to fight for your freedom. Just because the song says the land of the free and the home of the brave doesn't necessarily mean that you are just guaranteed freedom handed to you. Like, just because the United States wrote the Declaration of Independence, declaring their own independence, did not make them independent. They still had to fight for it. You know, and that's where a lot of Black Americans find themselves today. And when you are in an NFL where most of the league is Black, and I expect to see some things from the NBA as well, though I will not expect to see any sitting down on the bench, because you will probably be suspended in the NBA for doing that kind of thing. You stand during the national anthem in the NBA. It's a very long, hard rule there with them. But regardless, when it comes to those kinds of decisions being made, you can understand the plight, or at least the feeling of a plight, from Black Americans about how it is that they feel like they are being treated, especially and in particular, by the police. There isn't any resentment towards the police. There isn't any ill will towards the police, but there is the sense that something needs to change. And so as long as this story is still around, as long as people are going to try and talk about who's taking a knee and who's not taking a knee and who's unpatriotic, I'm going to keep trying to deflect the conversation back to what these protests are about in the first place, which is that if you are Black, you should not have to feel afraid of the police, that you should never feel as though you should be afraid of the police. And I'm sure that there are plenty of police officers who would agree with me that they don't want anybody being afraid of them for their skin color, their gender, sexual orientation, or whatever reason. You are a police officer. Your job is to help people. It makes your job easier when everybody trusts you. Okay. And we're trying to change a system here that makes it easy for the bad apples, the bad cops, to get away with this stuff, that you get suspended on paid leave after you shoot a guy. That's not okay. That is not okay. You don't get imprisoned for killing a person, and we have it on camera, and we have executions on camera. Okay, not everybody, not every situation is black and white. Like the Michael Brown situation, like the more you learn about that story, the more it becomes more and more complicated. But certainly, the young man in Cincinnati who was simply shot in the back, that is not a story that you see the video, you don't see anything else extra to it. Like, dude just got shot. He didn't have a weapon. He wasn't armed. He was walking away. That stuff's not okay. And you want to fight that, however you got to fight it, as long as you're being peaceful and as long as you are not being overtly crass and being overtly crude, then I'm okay with it. And taking a knee during the national anthem is not any of those things. And choosing to take a knee is also a respectful way of saying I am dedicated to making this country better. It's the respectful way of doing that. I mean, it's not like he put up his finger. He didn't shout profanities. He didn't continue stretching. He acknowledged that the flag and the ceremony was happening. He simply chose to stand off to the side and not participate. And I get that. I just do. You're listening to Hot 1240, Hot News Talk Radio, Clutch with Keon Rose. And the NCAA is pulling a lot of events out of North Carolina because North Carolina passed the HB2 bill, which is also known as the bathroom bill, even though that is a gross and highly disgusting misinterpretation of that bill. There are a lot more things attached to that bill beyond the transgender use of bathrooms. And, the NCAA is not having any part of it. They're pulling out events and games from North Carolina for passing that bill. And look, you can do that. I mean, Georgia tried to pass a similar bill. And the NFL said, look, I see you, Atlanta, building a new stadium for the Falcons. That means that in the near future, you will be hosting a Super Bowl. If you pass that bill, you will have no Super Bowl. There will be no Super Bowl for you. And the NFL is well in their rights to do that. And also, a lot of movies are filmed in Georgia because of the tax implications, which that you get a lot of tax breaks for filming in Georgia, and that Georgia is just a generally nice looking place to film things. And so when you go to Georgia, you've got a lot of different areas. You can film in the city, you can film out in the country, and you can do a number of different things. That Georgia's a great place to go shooting movies. Hollywood also decided to pull their money from that as well. And the effect was that Georgia backed up off that bill real quick. North Carolina, it's not going to be as easy. It's not going to be as easy. And you can almost see why. Like the influence of sports in North Carolina, basketball is a huge deal. But the All-Star game is not the Super Bowl. It's really not going to have that impact. If you promised North Carolina a Super Bowl and then said, if you don't clean this junk up, you're not going to get one, I'm not saying it would work necessarily. I'm saying it would be much more effective. Pulling an All-Star game doesn't really do as much. How many of you sit down and watch the All-Star game? I do. I'm a huge NBA fan, but everybody's not a huge NBA fan. This is the South. We do football down here. I mean, it's just not as huge a deal. I mean, and North Carolina is a basketball city, but it's a college basketball state, not city state. It's a college basketball state. Duke, North Carolina, even NC State. There's a lot of college implications there. So, no, I don't really see it as being quite the same necessarily. But we'll see what effect this has and who breaks first. I doubt the NCAA is going to break first, because we talk about how the NCAA isn't paying any of these athletes any money for all of the stuff that it is that they go out there and do. If any of that's the case, then the NCAA is loaded. And they're not going to break a sweat over not having things in North Carolina. This stuff is going to go. And I mean, Coach K at Duke has already called this stuff deplorable. I imagine Duke is going to be very, very cooperative with whatever it is the NCAA wants to do. But you have a lot of North Carolina games as far as the NCAA tournament is concerned, that a lot of times you'll have games in North Carolina, games in Raleigh, or what have you, and the NCAA is like, nope, don't even think about it. You are not going to get any of these games. And until stuff changes, you will not be seeing any of these games. And the economic impact of that cannot be underserviced, even though I do think this is a time to point out that a lot of these big sporting events don't have quite the positive economic impact that you think that they would have. We still flock to them because we think that they do. We think they do. So that's one of those things. You're listening to Hot 1240, Hot News Talk Radio, Clutch with Keon Rose, and there was a leak from WADA, which is the World Anti-Doping Agency. Doping agency hacked by Russian hackers, basically aiming to prove that, look, there are other people out here doping. There are other people out here cheating too, and they released some information, including the information of Simone Biles, who has been diagnosed with ADHD, and she has, uses ADHD medication, and it's been cleared by the World Doping Agency, and people are going like, look, see, that's just an excuse for her to cheat. That's just an excuse for her to cheat. Which, even though, despite the fact that Simone Biles was not Simone Biles because of anything that Simone Biles did mentally, which is what you would take ADHD medication for. If you've asked any baseball players about their use of such medication, it's for concentration. It's not for power. The reason why Simone Biles is such an amazing Olympic athlete is what she is able to do physically. People cannot keep up with what it is that she is doing. But nevertheless, they're saying that she had some kind of advantage and that she used ADHD as a reason to cheat. Never mind that if there were any Russian athletes who had the same thing, if you got it cleared with WADA, the World Anti-Doping Agency, beforehand, they would have let it slide for you too. So it's not an issue of just having an excuse to cheat. And we've seen players with ADD and ADHD medication get in trouble with doping agencies before, whether it be Maria Sharapova and the WTA or any number of NFL athletes in the NFL, where they've gotten in trouble before. But the thing that they've gotten in trouble for was that they did not register their medication either fully and properly or at all. That's what they got in trouble for, not having the medication. There is a number of athletes who are diagnosed with ADD and ADHD that use their medication, and everyone is fine with it and cool with it, because like if you need your drugs, then you just need it. But I think that there is a level of skepticism to like how easy it is to get such medication, which is why I would like my girlfriend on the show. It's a trade, which is a concept that I will also teach her about fantasy football, because she has joined the fantasy football league that I am in. I am a huge fantasy football fan, and so she will come and ask me questions about fantasy football. We will talk fantasy football and ADHD medication. That is our trade. However, as a fantasy football fan, and I know that some of you may have heard this already, but ESPN over the weekend, the ESPN fantasy football app crashed over the weekend basically as soon as the game started, and people did not have updates for what their fantasy football teams were doing, and you were trying to do the math in your head like you used to do in the old days of fantasy football with a pencil and paper. People just couldn't figure out what to do, and people lost their minds. And I just think it's very interesting how technology has changed the way that we look at sports. Like, you can't just look at a game and watch it anymore unless you've got some kind of fantasy or gambling implications, which a lot of people also do from their phone. Or FanDuel and DraftKings, or DraftDuel and FanKings. I never remember which. You have the unholy marriage of the two, fantasy football and gambling. People can't do either of those things. And so you've got basically people jonesing over their fantasy football team like a drug addict. They can't get enough of their fix. Like, hey man, how about you give me some of that fantasy football? Hey, ESPN, I just how's Garoppolo doing? I think I took a flyer on Garoppolo. I mean, people are just losing their minds. And the weird thing about it is people have lost the ability to just sit down and watch football. People have lost the ability to just sit down and watch football. And I get it. Why would you ever? And I understand that the Jaguars played the Packers, and they did so here on Hot 1240, Hot News Talk Radio. It was the first game of our triple header. And we'll be giving you triple headers the entirety of the NFL season because we're the home of Westwood One in the NFL here in Chattanooga. But the first game of the triple header was the Jaguars and the Packers. But what if the Jaguars were playing like the Raiders? What if the Jaguars were playing the Browns? Why would you ever sit down and watch the Jaguars play the Browns on purpose, provided you're not a Jags fan or a Browns fan? Why would you ever sit down and watch that on purpose? You wouldn't. You wouldn't sit down and watch it on purpose unless you had fantasy football implications on it. Then you would sit down and watch that on purpose. Like if Gary Barnidge were your tight end and you needed him, you might sit down and watch the Jags and Browns on purpose. Just saying. If Blake Bortles were your quarterback, or Allen Robinson, or Allen Hurns, if you were taking a flyer on that guy, you might sit down and watch it. Fantasy football has allowed people to sit down and watch bad football. Because I don't do that to myself. I don't sit down and watch bad football. Like last year, a lot of the Thursday night games were on. There were so many terrible Thursday night games. If the Thursday night game didn't have the Titans or the Falcons, because I cover both of them, if it didn't have them and it didn't have a team that I liked, I didn't watch it. I don't sit down and subject myself to bad football. But I didn't play fantasy last year. If I played fantasy, you would be willing to sit down and subject yourself to way more bad football. And this kind of speaks to the NFL and its monopoly that it has on football. That they are able now, thanks to technology, thanks to fantasy specifically, to have you so invested in keeping up with every single game that when you don't have it, as the Joker says in The Dark Knight, you lose your minds. You just can't handle it. And I saw some of the tweets. People looked like drug addicts. They were just fiending for just a little bit of fantasy, just a sports update here. I mean, it looked ridiculous. It looked absolutely ridiculous. You're listening to Hot 1240, Hot News Talk Radio, Clutch with Keon Rose. Nick Saban had some words for his team after the Western Kentucky game because he's Nick Saban. And despite the fact that Nick Saban and his Crimson Tide absolutely leveled Western Kentucky, which by the way, Western Kentucky, they might not be the cream of the crop, SEC school, but that's a good football team now. Western Kentucky can ball. Alabama rolls up in there, drops them, and Nick Saban said he's never been so unhappy in his whole life. And this is how he controls his team. He keeps everybody on pins and needles all the time If you're his offensive coordinator, Nick Saban does not care. He is going to chew you out. Doesn't care. Everybody's afraid of Nick Saban. You're a fan. I'm a fan. I'm in the media. We're all afraid of Nick Saban. Like, we just think either he's a bad guy or we don't know what he's going to do next. He's unpredictable. Like, we know he's going to win, but that's about all we know, and we don't like it. I think it's pretty cool. He keeps everything wrapped up under the chest. And look, I would be opposed to it if it didn't work. But you've seen the success that he's had with it. You're listening to Hot 1240, Hot News Talk Radio, Clutch with Keon Rose.
Wars come and go, but my soldiers stay eternal.
Now you can listen to Hot News Talk Radio anywhere, streaming live at Noogaradio.com. That's Noogaradio.com.
Hot News Talk 1240.
With every election, the government always gets in. You're right to be angry. We have no free market. Red tape everywhere. Taxes crushing. There's no level playing field. Tomorrow may be a day of reckoning. But there is something you can do. It's personal safety, personal security, shooter supply and indoor range. Find the handgun or long gun suitable to you. Take a concealed carry permit class. Use Shooter's roomy indoor private shooting range. Get expert personal advice. Shooter Supply fights boldly against big boxes. It helps people understand firearms. A free republic has become a despotism. Let them choke on their swag. For us, we invest in personal safety. In the Second Amendment, fight back, shop local. The country is in a desperate situation, but you don't have to be. Shooter Supply, love your neighbor, buy local. 875-4868, 875-4868, shooters-range.com. Shop shooters-range.com. Think about the future. What about your kids?
Hi, this is Mike at Wholesale Liquidation, Highway 58, next to Taco Bell, featuring over 6,000 square feet of unique and everyday wholesale items, discounted to, get this, 50 to 75% off of retail, from new and pre-owned tools to chainsaws and auto accessories. Wholesale Liquidation, Highway 58, next to Taco Bell.
You want more business. You want to increase your bottom line. You want to spend less on advertising, imaging your business, and general expenses. You need Trade Bank. Trade Bank of Chattanooga. Trade Bank. Call now to get access to nearly 400 local businesses. Trade Bank. Call 877-2202. 877-2202. Trade Bank. You want to increase your cash flow, your competitive edge, attract new customers, and build a loyal customer base. You need Trade Bank of Chattanooga. Call right now. 877-2202. When you join Trade Bank, you'll get the benefit of free advertising in our monthly magazine, tradebank.com, emails, and mailouts. Join Trade Bank now and receive your Trade Bank debit card with trade credits to spend any way you want with our wide variety of Trade Bank partners. For almost 30 years, Trade Bank has been your voice for small business, a member of the American Bankers Association, and in good standing with you. Trade Bank of Chattanooga. Call now for a free consultation, 877-2202. That's 877-2202. Trade Bank of Chattanooga.
This is Mike at For the Record at Northgate Mall. We're the largest complete record store in town. We sell old and new vinyl records, celebrity posters, music posters, and we are the largest in town. Come see us.
Becoming fair out there through the nighttime hours. Overnight lows 68 to 70. For the midweek, not much change. Partly cloudy, hot, a little on the humid side through Thursday. Just a slight chance of an afternoon storm. Highs 90 to 92 with a few more widely scattered late day showers and storms Friday. This forecast is brought to you by Walgreens. Get your flu shot at Walgreens today. No appointment necessary. That's Walgreens at the corner of Happy and Healthy. Vaccine restrictions apply. See pharmacy for details. And I'm Sports Team 12 Chief Meteorologist Patrick Orr.
On AM 1240, Hot News Talk Radio.
You give us 12 minutes and 40 seconds, we'll give you Chattanooga and the world. Hot News Talk 1240.
Hot 1240 Hot News Talk Radio with your Hot News Now update. 2 children, a 6-year-old and a baby, were claimed by flames in a house fire in Walker County on Caribou Lane. 5 other people were taken to the hospital, and a firefighter was injured trying to put those flames out and save lives. There was another house fire in East Ridge where a neighbor ran in to save a victim who was screaming for help. Smoke was seen by neighbors next door. They all ran to assist. Michael Wilson is the man credited with saving the woman's life. She's now in the hospital. Someone in Tennessee beat the odds and managed to win $100,000 in the Powerball ticket drawing. They managed to get both the 5 numbers in white and the 1 red number, the Powerball. And for an extra $1, they also multiplied the prize by a number of 2. The identity of this fortunate person has not been revealed. A woman who mysteriously vanished from Roswell, Georgia, has been missing since August the 26th, may be in Chattanooga, according to the family. She suffers from a health disorder and is in need of medication to maintain her well-being. She told a friend that she would be going out with friends and never showed up again. She drives a 2015 white Honda CR-V. It was going on in the Tennessee Valley. It's going on Hot 1240 Hot News Talk Radio.
Here comes Dale Earnhardt Jr. He's got third. He's going for second. Earnhardt going for the lead.
The NASCAR Sprint Cup Series is on the Motor Racing Network.
Hot News Talk 1240.
Hear it live on the Motor Racing Network, the voice of NASCAR.
Check it out live on Chattanooga's official NASCAR radio station.
Hot News Talk 1240.
This is Hot 1240, Hot News Talk Radio. You know, before we get into our anti-doping ADHD back and forth, and before we get into Jay Asks, the wonderful question segment for all of you significant others out there who do not understand sports, do not care, do not get why any of this stuff is important, we'll have some questions to ask and answer for you there so you can get the information that you so desperately wanted. I know you wanted it, so we have it for you. But before we do all of that stuff, I want to talk about just something really quickly. Kevin Harlan last night was doing play-by-play for Monday Night Football, the second Monday Night Football game, if you could call it a game. I call it a beatdown, a slaughtering, a drubbing, a woodshed beating, whatever you want to call that. The Rams proving, by the way, that just because you change cities doesn't mean that you got good at football. The Rams are still bad. They're still so very bad. You can change cities. You can be on Hard Knocks. You can still be bad at football. And nothing has changed. And so nothing interesting really happened in that game at all, except that there was a streaker running out onto the field. And Kevin Harlan, who is, by the way, one of the best play-by-play guys in the business, treated this streaker like it was the Super Bowl.
3rd and 4, looks into the nickel of San Francisco in the secondary. Hey, somebody has run out on the field. Some goofball in a hat and a red shirt. Now he takes off the shirt. He's running down the middle by the 50. He's at the 30. He's bare-chested and banging his chest. Now he runs the opposite way. He runs to the 50. He runs to the 40. The guy is drunk, but there he goes. The 20. They're chasing him. They're not going to get him. Waving his arms, bare-chested. Somebody stop that man.
Here comes the blue coat.
Oh,
Kevin.
they got him.
Here comes
They're
the
coming
blue
from the
coats.
left. Oh, and they tackle him at the 40-yard line. That was the most exciting thing to happen tonight.
I tell you what, that was a great call on your part. That was a great call. All right, I'm ready for the last 11:31 now, Kevin. Let's go.
Look at the police. They've surrounded this man like he is, like he's just robbed a bank.
I tell you what, he got a whole lap in
before
they got him. I mean, that was pretty good. I expected him to go down much sooner.
Yeah, but I hope it was worth it, my friend, because you got a night in the clink coming up.
Kevin Harlan, ladies and gentlemen. That's why he's the best. First off, I wish that would always happen every time there was a streaker on the field. Like, I understand why we don't show the streaker running. We don't want to give him attention. We don't want to encourage other knuckleheads out there to go out there and do the stuff that guy did, because it's dangerous. It's dangerous. You never know if you might get somebody out there that's really unhinged and out of it, that might actually come out there and do harm to the players, referees, coaches, whoever else. But if every now and then that happened, and if Kevin Harlan is doing the game, he's got to do it. Like, he's got to do it now. But, like, what's the list of guys that you would want to do that? Kevin Harlan's up there. Marv Albert is another guy. Prime Marv Albert would have been nice if Marv Albert did the streaking play-by-play. It would be pretty cool if he had Marv Albert. I would take Mike Tirico. If Mike Tirico, who I don't believe is doing Monday Night Football at all, I was surprised not to see him in the booth, and I hadn't been following all the changes at ESPN because there's like a million people leaving. But Mike Tirico doing that would also have been really cool because there's just some guys that just have that voice. But Kevin Harlan, far and away, he just killed it because he's just got that authoritative voice that lends itself to this is the most official thing happening. You would have thought that was part of the game. You would have thought that was part of the game. I could not believe what I was hearing with my own two ears with that. And he just killed it. You couldn't see the streaker on screen, but you could see it in your mind where he was going. That is ridiculous. And anytime you have those little fun moments, and by the way, that game had nothing going for it up until that moment. Absolutely nothing. Because the Rams weren't putting up a fight. The Rams didn't score. That streaker was the most interesting thing that happened to that game. Colin Kaepernick took a knee before the game started. Somebody streaked across the field with 11:31 to go in the fourth. That was the most interesting thing that happened in that game. Those two things. Non-football things. Man. Which is good, because I'm a Redskins fan, and the Steelers brought the lumber to Washington and absolutely leveled them in a way that was embarrassing, and you forgot that Washington was really bad last night because somehow the Rams were worse. Somehow the Rams were much, much worse. And now we're going to transition a little bit over because we want to get back to our segment of ADHD things that we were planning on talking about with Jay, my girlfriend, who not only hosts the Clutch Community Corner, but oftentimes comes on to ask questions about sports to help fill in those significant others who do not care or understand exactly what the big deal is. So thank you for joining us.
Hey, I'm just glad that we've proposed a successful trade.
We have, which is a concept we'll get into a little later on in the show. But yes, this is a successful trade, and hopefully the commission of the league doesn't block it, and we'll see how that goes. But okay, so I have some questions for you because Simone Biles is basically, her information was leaked that she is diagnosed with ADHD, has been taking ADHD medication, and people are saying that this is basically an excuse for her to cheat, as it were, despite the fact that people have been taking ADHD medication as athletes for a while. But is there some skepticism with how easy it is to get this kind of medication?
Gotcha. Well, first, I'd like to clarify that I am a licensed master social worker, which means I am in the process of educating to become a licensed clinical social worker. I do not work with Simone Biles. I do not have any ties or anything. And this is all educated opinion, but...
And a little bit of conjecture.
A little bit of conjecture, okay. But based on educated opinions, right? Just throwing that out there. But as far as ADHD, I think that we've definitely seen a rise of diagnoses presented, especially in youth, over the last few years. We've seen it go up from, I think it was 9.5 or so percent, according to the CDC, in like 2008, to like 11% of all of our children being diagnosed with ADHD and ADHD-like symptoms in the last few years. So that's very interesting to me to see that this diagnosis is becoming incredibly prevalent. I think that's worth noting. I will just leave that there.
Okay. And do you think it's becoming more prevalent because we're noticing things more about it, we're learning more, or because somebody has something to gain from us finding more people with ADHD?
See, and here's the thing, because this is, at this point, I will speak from my opinion.
Right. I'm asking for your opinion. I'm not asking you to speak for the community as a whole or anything else. Just your opinion.
I just find it very interesting that with all of the changes in healthcare, changes in now it's easier to diagnose for sure. Changes in the diagnostic statistical manual. This is the 5th edition that we're on now, which was also recently updated. And the new, how do I say this politely? Like it is easier now. There are more drugs available to treat said issues. I find it very interesting that now we are as a society moving forward in diagnosing, and it's not just ADHD. There's other issues that are now more prevalent as well.
Right.
And mind you, in America specifically, I just think it's very interesting that we are now becoming hyper aware with the insurance requirements to now pay for all of our awareness. I just think that's interesting. That's all. But I am glad that people who need help can get help, although those people are probably struggling with insurance, as I've seen. But that's interesting. It's just interesting. Sorry.
No, you're fine. Okay, so here's another question. What medication does one get typically for ADHD? Having never had ADHD in my entire life.
Okay, so I think what we need to do, if we can, is backtrack a little bit and talk about ADHD.
Okay.
Again, this is one of, in my experience anyway, a lot of the, well, I should say, I've just seen a lot of individuals who are diagnosed with ADHD of the younger population. In order to get a diagnosis for ADHD, you need to have had 6 or more of the symptoms from each of the categories or one of the other categories. So there are 3 categories. You have the combined type, you have inattentive and hyperactive, which sort of kind of are self-explanatory. The types of ADHD, obviously, where if you're inattentive, you have a hard time focusing, you have a hard time staying on task, that type of thing. And then hyperactive, others have often described it as feeling like you have a motor running, that type of a thing. And so the other combined would be just a conglomeration of both. So that is, in short, the way that you would need to have that. So if you are 17 or over, you need to have 5 of those symptoms. If you are, I guess, 16 and below, you need to have at least 6 of those symptoms. Also, it needs to have been present for 6 months and or before you are 12, with signs showing before you're 12 years of age. Now, previously, it was before 7 years of age, and now it is 12 years of age, which, in my opinion, makes it a lot easier to diagnose. Although some studies have said that was because there wasn't significant evidence showing that it needed to be one or the other. And some of those similar studies were also showing that adults who started off as children having ADHD continued having ADHD symptoms in adulthood. So children who had ADHD continued on to have similar symptoms in their adult lives.
Interesting.
So as far as medications that are given, it really depends on the person, their allergies, their body type, what other medications they may be taking already. It depends on the therapist or doctor or clinician, I should say, who's providing the diagnosis and subsequently the prescription of the medication. Usually that's a psychiatrist who's able to do that, or other medical professionals. So again, it really depends on who and what. We're seeing like Concerta, Adderall, Ritalin. These are typical drugs that are given to individuals with ADHD.
Okay. All right. So let's try and warp this back to sports, because especially Simone Biles, because it was her information that ended up, having the biggest splash. But you mentioned Adderall. A lot of baseball players have been caught with Adderall. Is there an advantage that somebody could have if they're playing sports by taking these medications, especially if they are somebody that doesn't actually suffer from ADHD?
Here's the thing. Okay, so it's complicated because most research that I have run into lately have suggested that individuals who do not have ADHD or like symptoms do not benefit from taking these medications, right? So breaking that down, we see that other than wakefulness, which is being able to stay awake for longer than normal periods of time, it's actually supposed that there is a negative benefit from abusing said medication. So that is something to think about. However, in my personal life, I have seen, like not I, but individuals that I have known, I have seen individuals taking these drugs to do better on tests, to stay awake, to study more, etc. Okay, I will say that.
Okay.
I will say, but again, one is clinical studies and one is just observation, right? So I'm sure it depends on the person. But the idea of what these drugs do, so basically dopamine is a chemical, is a neurotransmitter in the body that helps with pleasure and attention and drive. And so basically, like that movement and attention piece with your norepinephrine, if you think about like fight or flight, which is like if someone jumps up and scares you, there's a series of neurotransmitters that are released in the body to help you focus and move quickly and save yourself, so to speak, right?
Mm-hmm.
These are basic biological functions, okay? So if we jump back to, does taking a medication that helps me enhance like the dopamine and lessen the neuroepinephrine in my body, does that help me react faster?
I would think so, right?
It sounds like an interesting theory.
That's what baseball players who have abused it, and certainly some of them who haven't needed it have said, is that it helps them react faster. And when you consider that, a lot of times baseball players are having to identify pitches moving 90, 100 miles an hour, which is faster than the human body can consciously react to that. Certainly that extra reaction time would help, no?
Here's the thing. If you are struggling with a diagnosis that says you have trouble focusing and you have trouble above average being able to connect to a focused reality and control that, then ideally taking those drugs would help you do that, would it not?
Yes.
Okay, then.
So regardless of whether or not you have a problem or don't have a problem.
But let's be careful because we don't want to send everybody to, your local drug dealer pulling out.
Right. Hey, buddy, can you give me that
the baseball team?
Get me that Adderall, which, because that's part of it too. And then of course, a lot of NFL players who tend to take those kinds of drugs. You've got gigantic playbooks that you need to memorize. And look, here's something that can help you focus on that. So there's plenty of uses across the board in sports to help you with that.
But here's the thing I'd like to throw out, because if you think about it, I'm a proponent for natural remedies. Obviously, any drug that you take, illicit, licit, prescription, non-prescription, any drug that you take is going to alter the way that your body functions. Period.
Right.
That is the purpose of a drug. Period.
But does it alter it in a way that gives you an advantage? Because that's the only reason why an athlete would take it.
All I'm saying is I think it's very important to consider natural remedies. I think it's very interesting, again, that with the rise of diagnoses that are coming and the rise of medication prescription and the decrease of natural remedies, or, the snake doctors, as I've heard them termed.
The snake oil salesman.
Right. I think it's very interesting, specifically with ADHD. It is recommended that if you are going to be giving medications, then psychotherapy also needs to be the first line of defense with youth, which is under 17, with ages, specifically up to 5 and then 4 and on. But those are all metrics that we probably don't need to get into here. But
gotcha.
For youth, for children, we should say, and under 17, under 12, in that ballpark, that pre-adolescent, adolescent ballpark, psychotherapy is the number one recommended treatment. Recommend diets that avoid chemical processes like dyes and things like that, BHT, different things like that, which you're going to find in pretty much everything you eat, whether it be potato chips or soda. You're going to find these things in them. Ideally, an athlete would be staying away from said things. Ideally, I assume.
You assume.
But then also, we talk about other means of natural remedy for specifically ADHD include high levels of activity, high levels of regulating activities, meaning going outside, spending time, not too much time in front of like a computer screen, spending time doing, again, exercise, things that are going to naturally increase the dopamine and other types of hormones and neurotransmitters that are released in the body for said action. So I think it's interesting that athletes who are supposedly at the front of health and fitness could have such strong needs for psychotropic and other medications.
I hear you, and we could talk about this all day, but I really want to get to the fantasy football segment because A, I'm excited about it, and B, I didn't want to tease it and then never get there. Okay. But I will say that athletes will do anything to get an edge over other athletes. So it's just a difference between
can a person fake an illness hypothetically so. But if it's been cleared and all that, then there is some medical validity to it, and we need to consider that before we start pointing.
Okay. And that's definitely fair. You're listening to Hot 1240, Hot News Talk Radio, Clutch with Keon Rose. That's Jay explaining the how ADHD works, how the diagnosis process works, and how it is that you could get your hands on such medication, and if it is fair or unfair in the light of competing with other athletes who may not necessarily have that diagnosis and not have access to the possible advantages that could have for you. But let's roll into some of your questions. You can now ask me questions about fantasy football, something that I know infinitely more about than I do about ADHD medication.
Oh, okay. Wait, really quickly. Side note. I just think this conversation, why it's super important that we raise mental health awareness on all levels, because taking medication for like schizophrenia is going to be a little different than taking something for basic ADHD. One is actually going to impair your function completely, and one is just going to be aggravating, and that should be considered.
Okay.
Anyways.
All right. Fair enough.
Football. What on earth?
What? Fantasy football is just like, remember when you were in school and you had kids who were captains and they would pick on the schoolyard to see who would be on your team? It's like that with you and your friends. You're all the captains, and the entire NFL are the kids on the schoolyard that you're picking. I want Cam.
That sounds exciting.
I want Aaron Rodgers.
What if we all want Cam?
You can't all have Cam. Just the same thing in the schoolyard. You look at the big, strong kid and go, yeah, I want him on my team. Like, the other team can't have him.
Well, that sucks.
Absolutely.
Okay.
So you've got to plan your team strategically, right?
So, okay, like, what am I looking for? Like, what is like your, top 3 best solutions for choosing an excellent fantasy football team?
Okay. You try and find people who do more than one thing. So you have a quarterback. The reason why everybody wants Cam is Cam throws for touchdowns. Cam runs for touchdowns too. So you get a ton of fantasy points from Cam. If you have a running back, say your running back is LaShawn McCoy or Le'Veon Bell. Those guys run for touchdowns, but those guys can catch touchdowns too. So you've got a few more opportunities to score with those guys than you do somebody else. A good defense, usually in fantasy football, your defense starts off with a certain amount of points, and then if they give up more than 21 points, you just start losing points from them. But if a defense is able to intercept a pass and score a touchdown, you get extra points from your defense for that. So you want people who do more than one thing for you. Granted, some positions can't. Like your kicker can't do anything else for you usually.
I mean, but do I have to have a kicker?
You don't have to have a kicker. You don't have to have anything on your fantasy football team,
like,
but you will not win.
Speaking,
you should have a kicker.
Okay.
You should definitely have a kicker.
Did you say I don't have to have a kicker? I don't have a kicker, and I lose to you because you have a kicker.
I would try and draft every position on your team.
Okay.
Like, don't
so, okay.
neglect
It's a full football team that I'm drafting.
So you can draft multiple quarterbacks, but you can only start one per matchup. So
I'm literally like the coach of my team also.
Correct.
Except I'm not giving them things.
You're not actually giving them.
I'm just deciding who starts and goes when and where.
Absolutely.
So do I get any extra players, or is it just one full football team?
You get to draft bench players also.
So what happens if like my starting wide receiver like breaks his leg in the first game?
That is that you would have hopefully drafted. You have 7 open bench spots on your bench. So then you would draft 7 extra players. In there should be another wide receiver for you. Will he be as good as the one that you started? Presumably not. But he could step in and you would get some points there as opposed to nothing.
Okay, so when we think of fantasy, we think of Disney. Because like that's Fantasyland, blah, 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 blah.
Maybe.
Okay.
Okay.
What were you going to say?
Nothing. We're running out of time, so we got to hurry.
Is fantasy football much like Disney's version of sports?
Sort of, in as much as the games that you're playing are only real in the league you're playing with. So with you and your friends, your team only affects that league. But
okay.
That's about all the time that we have there, but I'm glad we got those couple of questions in.
What do I win if I beat you?
Bragging rights and hugs. You're listening to Hot 1240, Hot News Talk Radio. Thank you for joining me today. Stick around, folks. Alex Jones next. Remember, it's not how you start, it's how you finish. Stay clutch. I'll see you in 24 hours.
You give us 12 minutes and 40 seconds, we'll give you Chattanooga and the world.
News Talk 1240.
I'm blowing everything up. We're starting over.
I'm doing a new show. I want guys who push it to the middle of the table and go over the top. Take a risk, fail miserably. I'm right, and I'm not wrong, and I'll never back down. Conflict works. Allow it.
It's The Herd with Colin Cowherd. Right here and everywhere. Noon Eastern.
You give us 12 minutes and 40 seconds, we'll give you Chattanooga and the world.
News Talk 1240. We've got a table here at Delia's, ready to delight in a plate of authentic Mexican food. Delia spreads a rich selection: loaded nachos, crazy chicken, homemade tamales, maybe the enchiladas with beef, chicken, pork, quesadillas. Every dish beautifully pictured on the menu to help us decide. We're at Delia's in Saudi Daisy near the Thrasher Light. There's dinner. Delia's uses the freshest ingredients, cooked to perfection. Nacho chips made fresh every day in the kitchen. Delia's,